Mill is an archetype that wishes to capitalize on a simple piece of text from the Magic Comprehensive Rules. Rule 121.4 states that a player who attempts to draw a card from a library with no cards in it loses the game the next time a player would receive priority. In essence, you're attacking your opponent's library instead of their life total, removing all cards they can draw and slowly but surely bringing them to their doom. But as tantalizing as the idea might seem, there's an innate flaw to the game plan. It may not seem apparent at first, but Mill doesn't interact with its opponent in a necessarily meaningful way. It attacks arguably the most random aspect of the game, the library, while not affecting the creatures that are creeping up on the battlefield or the spells that stay hidden in your opponent's hand. Simply put, this is card disadvantage, which means a card such as Glimpse the Unthinkable doesn't affect the game state in a way that a Tarmogoyf can. So, how does Mill solve this issue? What makes Mill so explosive? Well everyone, it's Shaff, aka That Mill Guy, and I'm here to talk about how Visions of Beyond is the single best card you can cast in any Mill deck. Our journey starts in Alpha, and the beginnings of the Power 9. With the inception of the Boon Cycle, there was one card out of the group that stood out, especially since the card in question was the only rare in the cycle. I'm of course referring to Ancestral Recall. As some fun trivia, this card was meant to be green, and referred to as Earthlore, when instead, the name was later given to an enchant land in Ice Age, and it went through of course another name change in Ancestral Memories, which was later given to a blue sorcery in Mirage. Homages aside though, this card is a hotly debated topic in itself. Arguably one of the most powerful cards ever printed in Magic's history, next to Black Lotus. I believe the card market's product description put it quite well, explaining the characteristics of the other one-drop spells it was printed with, but highlighting that Ancestral Recall offered something a bit harder to come by: card draw. For years to come, the card would go down in infamy, joining the reserve list and becoming one of the single best top decks that Vintage has to offer. And yet WotC spent years trying to recreate the power level of this card, adding more stipulations to the draws or simply replacing the other two cards with some card filtering. Ultimately, the true power of the card could not be matched, as drawing 3+ cards is tacked so heavily in the rather current design philosophy of Magic, with examples such as Precognitive Perception and Into the Story. So far, the design team had not found the correct formula, and few were left wondering if we could ever draw 3 cards for such a low mana cost ever again. But it all came to a head with the release of Core 2012. Visions of Beyond was spoiled, and LSV wrote a small article, noting it as a fantastic control card, being able to cycle early and be explosive value that you would need to fuel yourself through the late game. More in the mind of the Mill player though, LSV talked about the incentive to play a self-mill strategy using the likes of Hedron Crab and Vengevine, and using Visions of Beyond as a mid-game piece to keep the beatdown going. Of course, with the refining of the graveyard as a zone in Modern, this idea would coalesce into the Crabvine deck, which usually the only blue card ever played in it is Tome Scour or the aforementioned Crab. So where did Visions of Beyond go? Well, for years the Mill deck stood in the lower recesses of the Modern meta. It stood as a fringe idea, barely a deck, as many wouldn't even be able to recognize it as a strategy if they played against it. Until 2016, when Wedge from the Manosaurs created his Modern Mill deck tech. Serving as a gateway to the archetype for many, especially due to the success of the Manosaurs as a channel, this deck brought to light the hilarity of the so-called spell aggro strategy and how powerful it actually was, being able to take advantage of your opponent's fetch lands while staying defensive behind powerful prison elements. But one card, of course, stood out amongst the crowd. Wedge put it quite bluntly, stating sometimes we run out of cards in our hand, and sometimes we need more ways to mill. That's what Visions of Beyond is for. This card solves the glaring issue that Mill has, As a mid-range strategy, this archetype couldn't keep up with the likes of Jund, as it had no static elements such as Liliana and didn't have the recursion that the Mardu strategies had with their graveyard. It seemed that even a planeswalker that affected the board and could mill was too powerful for R&D to print haphazardly, hence why Nightmare Muse is overcosted for the likes of Modern. This is where Visions of Beyond fills in the gaps, even sequencing quite well with the common turn 3 Field of Ruin line, providing just enough mana to keep the ball rolling. Suffice it to say, this card is what keeps the mill deck going. There can always be better mill cards printed, but the payoffs of a strategy are ultimately what makes it playable, as Visions of Beyond is akin to Azusa in the Titan strategies, or Thalia's Lieutenant in the human strategies. This is to say that these cards are replaceable in the shells that they exist in, but the strategy suffers without them. And Mill would be nowhere near what it is today without its ability to pay homage to the most powerful blue Magic card ever printed. And with that, I want everyone to remember that even the impossible is possible. And as we ponder that thought, I hope you join me next time as we take a glimpse into the unthinkable.